everyone and welcome back to Whisky Wednesday. A first for us this week. This is my first ever bottle of Bladnoch. And as my arm struggles to hold this thing to the camera, because this is one of the heaviest bottles of whiskey I've ever held in my life. This must weigh the same or more as a bottle of Johnny Walker Blue Label. Like at least 2.5, 3, maybe even 4 kilograms. I could rep this and it would feel like a pretty decent workout after a while. I've never owned a bottle of Bladnoch. To my knowledge, we as a channel have never reviewed Bladnoch. This is the Vinaya. Vinaya is a bit unusual because it isn't a Scottish word, it is a Sanskrit word that essentially means, I think it means like hope or gratitude. I think it's gratitude. Because the current owner of Bladnoch is, he's an Australian gentleman. I believe he made his millions or his billions in the dairy industry or the yogurt industry. Bladnoch has had a bit of a torrid past and we're a bit late to the game reviewing it, so most of you may already know this. It's one of the oldest distilleries in Scotland. It was established in 1817. At one point it was the most southerly distillery in Scotland. I think there are a few more now, maybe like Annandale, the Borders Distillery, but I can't remember if that's on the English side of the border or the Scottish side of the border. It was owned by Diageo for a very large amount of its modern history. And then about 10, 12 years ago, two Irish brothers decided to take the distillery off Diageo's hands, but they signed contracts that still put Diageo in control of the distillery in a big way. So they weren't allowed to bottle stock that Diageo had distilled. They were only allowed to bottle their own whiskey, but they could only distill it a couple of times a year. It was a very unfortunate contract. So it's another story of a very large company messing over someone who wanted to take it independent. But now an Australian gentleman is in charge of it and he's taken it fully independent. And this, I believe, is their sort of like lead sort of entry-level bottle of whiskey. This huge chunky decanter with quite a good bit of information on it, a slightly reimagined logo and the nice gold Bladnoch letters there. This is a combination of first fill bourbon and first fill sherry casks. It is non-chill filtered. It doesn't state anything about natural colour, but that isn't necessarily a problem for me. I got this on a little bit of a deal. It was meant to be about £50 and I picked it up for about 44. So there's loads of websites with decent sales on at the minute. And I thought this makes sense to try a newish, for me anyway, lowland whiskey. This is the box it comes in. It's almost got like a faux leather kind of look and feel to it. And again, that beautiful giant B in gold just makes this thing stand out a little bit more. But yes, what do I think of it? A couple of years ago, there was a YouTube channel around, what's the dude's name? It was when we started filming in the Whisky Jar in Manchester, so quite when we went very high production value. I can't remember the guy's name, but he wanted a sample of Stag Junior off me because we reviewed it. I sent him a sample of it and he sent me a sample of Bladnoch Samsara, which I really didn't like. I don't particularly have a problem with sulphur in sherry cask whiskies. I think sometimes it can add like a good point of contrast, but that was just sulphur. There were no other flavours to it at all. And that again would have been 6 or 7 years ago. So I think that put me off the brand for a bit. But I saw this on sale and thought, that's a lovely colour, even though it may not be natural colour. And I just think that when you buy a new bottle of whiskey, or even a bottle of whiskey you know very well, owning that entire bottle and working your way through it is a study in that spirit. It's a study in that house style. And, you know, I'm just intrigued to know a little bit more about Bladnoch in itself. But anyway, that's enough about this very heavy thing. I'm going to put that down now. And it means I can finally throw the box away because I don't need it for the B-roll anymore. And we can sit here and analyse this product. Did I have any thoughts and feelings about what this whiskey would smell and taste like when I bought it? It's a lowland, so I inherently thought it'd be quite grassy and quite light. How wrong I was. So much like the Hood Glacé we did last week, this is a very youthful product. But the first fill bourbon and the first fill sherry casks tried to find a percentage of each for you, but unfortunately I couldn't find them. The influence of those casks on this have turned this into one of the chocolatiest whiskies I've ever smelt in my entire life. If you just sit with your nose in that thing for a while, the amount of like milk chocolate notes and fresh cream that come across are quite impressive for something which I would imagine to be maybe 6 to 8, maybe 9-year-old stock. Again, in a similar way to the French single malt we reviewed last week, there are some beautiful peachy, apricot-y, mango-y notes on it. Not much else, I will say. I was expecting like a very typical kind of Glenkinchy, grassy, lemongrass kind of thing to it. And it doesn't really have any of that. It is quite an alluring smell. I've been privileged enough to try some like really old samples of like Aberlour and Macallan from the 70s and the 80s, and it isn't a million miles off smelling like those. But it is quite zingy, it is quite fresh. It just doesn't have maybe those classic grassy lowland notes. And if you do look the Bladnoch range up, the further up you go in price and age, so much more sherry begins to get involved. I can't remember how long the gentleman who currently owns it has owned the distillery for, so I'm assuming this is probably some of his distillate, whereas the older stock obviously will be old Diageo stock, or what those unfortunate pair of brothers had limited time to make. But yeah, chocolate, peach, a little bit of orange. Oh, maybe even like a little bit of lemon now, the longer it's in the glass. But overall, one of the most approachable things you could probably come across in the world of whiskey, especially for about 50 quid, especially if you've never tried it before. But let's taste it and see what's going on. Ooh. Again, I've not drank a lot out of this. The day it arrived in its little postage box, I bottled some samples up and gave it to a few friends. But the size of the bottle is weirdly deceptive. You'd think this is probably a litre, just from looking at it. But there's not been a lot taken out of this bottle. The upfront flavour is very much in this way of chocolate, but it moves away from milk chocolate and it becomes kind of like white chocolate, almost like caramelized white chocolate. Very sort of granulary sugar notes to it. I like refined sugar. There is a little bit of brown sugar in there too. You get this darker sort of molasses note that's much more emphasized on the finish. And there is a nice welcoming spice. My brain wanted to say peppery, but it's not peppery spice. It's just kind of... I use this saying quite a lot, but it's almost like a gentle sort of pulsating heat. I can feel it at the very back of my tongue, and it's almost like doing this. Very interesting liquid. I suppose if you gave this someone blind and went, this is a single malt whiskey, you'd probably assume it was a young Speyside. I don't think your mind would instantly jump to the lowlands. But it does have some, there are notes in here that remind me of young Glenfarclas, which historically I've not been a fan of. But this at that higher alcohol strength just works a bit better for me. It does have remnants of things like Glenfarclas 10, those orangey, lemony, slightly sherried notes. Weirdly enough, the chocolatey notes, the milk chocolate is coming from the sherry, as are some of the fruity notes we're getting. There's not a lot of that bourbon influence. If you talk about first fill bourbon and first fill sherry casks, there isn't a lot of that kind of caramel, toffee, vanilla stuff at all, really. Not even on the nose. It must be like quite an even balance of the two. And sherry will always outweigh bourbon in a vatting just because of the intensity of what it can do. Maybe the white chocolatey, granularly sugary thing is the bourbon cask coming through, but it doesn't scream toffee, caramel, coconut, all those kind of classic bourbon notes. But it's light, it's fresh. For 46.7%, despite that pulsating heat, that's deceptively easy to drink, and I will be drinking quite a lot of this. This might be one of those things where once I've done with it, I remove the label and keep it as a decanter, because you could use this to pour and you'd feel like something on the Titanic with the weight in it. Or if someone breaks into my house, I can use it to bludgeon them with, because it is. I hope the cork doesn't come out when I do this. One of the heaviest things in the world. Like, look at the thickness of that glass at the bottom. And it's got rounded edges. The walls are quite thick too. So heavy. For those of us that still equate weight to wealth, that could be something that might interest you. But I just think it's quite a fun decanter. It really does stand out. If you walked into a bar and you saw that on the back bar, you'd instantly go, what is that? So that's always a good bit of marketing on their part. The longer it's in the glass, the more lemony it is becoming. Again, more bourbon influence. It's not a particularly complex whiskey, but I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing for the price point. I think if you're looking to get into a new whiskey, they shouldn't always be the most complex things on the planet. They should be very approachable. They should be very easy to get along with. And this is, it's just got very nice sweet notes to it. It's just under 47% ABV with no chill filtration. The natural colour thing's a little bit of an issue for some, but even brands like Glen Scotia and Loch Lomond aren't all natural colour. I put non-chill filtering above that, especially when you're paying for like a higher ABV single malt at a relatively low price. These things weigh out to be quite a good balance. I think overall, taste-wise, I'm going to give it like a 7.5 out of 10. It is a very nice whiskey. I will enjoy drinking it. I would be intrigued to know what the next one up is. I think they do a 10 or an 11-year-old in mostly bourbon, which would very much tick my boxes. But overall, that's the Bladnoch Vinaya, and I will give that a 7.5 out of 10. Thank you all very much for watching. In the next couple of weeks, we've got some really unusual stuff coming up. I've got some very affordable young bourbon. I've got some very old premium bourbon. We have, what else we got coming up? A really weird single cask that I bought back in October or even September. It was like 7 months ago at this point. But just wanted to see how it would develop and if it would change. So that's coming up. I'm going to be doing some rum reviews. I have just purchased 3 bottles of rum, one of which has been a mainstay for me for a very long time, but 2 are very new to me and they're very impressive. And I really like them. And between them, I think they only cost me £70. Like, they're really not expensive, but maybe a little bit over, maybe £74. But between the 2 of them, they're really not expensive. To buy 2 bottles of anything these days for about 70 quid is quite impressive. But yeah, so you've got some cool stuff to look forward to in the upcoming weeks. And yeah, I'll see you all soon. Have a good week.